God, I love tea. Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update for the 8th of June 2023. There's so much going on that I feel my brain is going to melt and trickle out of my ears. So apologies if that happens during this video. First thing to say is that I have a live chat, a live stream that's going to take place today at 12 o'clock UK time. So that is, at time of recording, only about 2.5 hours away. So by the time you're watching this, it's either on right now or it's soon to be. So check that out. Go to my ATP Geopolitics, go to the live, and it's first one. Also, to let you know, I've got a live stream arranged for Georgie from Ukraine Matters next Tuesday evening UK time. So again, check that out. Look at the live tab on my ATP Geopolitics YouTube channel page. Okay, let's get to the news, and we'll go straight to the Ukraine general staff figures for the losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply as ever. Go and check out my other videos if you want to see me drone on about that. Right, 730 liquidated personnel, so that's slightly less than yesterday, but still higher than it has been, which indicates that we have got some activity going along on the front line, and I'll explain that a little bit later or detail that. 18 tanks, 16 APCs or APVs, armored personnel vehicles. That is a significant number of mechanized equipment in both categories there. That is just, 18 tanks, to lose 18 tanks in one day. If true, even if it's 9 tanks, if it's 50% off, that is still really significant. And it just shows that there is a lot of activity along that front line. Right, 28 artillery systems, 1 MLRS. That is a massive number. 28 artillery systems. Again, the numbers in this category every day have just been phenomenal. The Russians must really be hurting in their in this category, in their capability of defending their lines with artillery usage. Ukraine appear to be doing a phenomenal job in taking some of this stuff out. 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems is not good news for the Russians. I'll show you some footage of that. I think they are losing some really high value equipment at the moment. 15 drones, 35 vehicles and fuel tanks. Wow, that's a massive uptick there, as well as we can imagine Ukraine are going to be hammering logistics lines. We know that HIMARS and Storm Shadows are working overtime and making some big hits. I don't know whether any of those will be equipment accumulations, warehouses with some stored equipment, or whether, who knows. It's obviously fairly secretive what they're aiming for, but we are getting quite a bit of footage from behind the lines. Luhansk has just been majorly hit this morning in occupied Luhansk, so I'll detail some of that in a second. 8 pieces of special equipment, and I think special equipment might be covered by some video footage that I'm just about to show you. So it could be like radar systems as well as electronic warfare systems, and of course other things like excavators and so on and so forth. But anyway, the end result is that's another really difficult day for the Russians. Yes, the Ukrainians are going to be losing a lot of equipment as well. In fact, there's a couple of instances of them losing quite a bit of equipment as they are going on the attack at the moment. That's going to happen. This is war, and we must not get into this really positive mindset where you think that Ukraine can attack and magically not lose stuff. They're going to lose a bunch of equipment because they're attacking, and it's just the nature of the beast, especially when you're attacking fortified defenses. We've got some evidence that minefields are becoming a bit of an issue as well, or at least there's one instance of that. So we'll talk about that in a second. Right. This footage here is of a Ukrainian TRML 4D multifunctional radar from an RST SLM, so surface to air missile system, short range, I think, taken out by Russian Lancet. And being a short range system, that's why a Lancet can get to this and take it out. So this is to show you that, hey, it's not plain sailing for the Ukrainians. They are going to be losing some significant equipment themselves. This is a high value target for a Lancet to take out, and that is unfortunate for the Ukrainians. Surface-to-air missile systems are going to be super useful, and the radar components of that in providing that network of coverage. But it's super important for the coming counteroffensive that they have a load of this in place, because let's face it, the Russians do have that superiority still the uh, with regard to the air force and the range of the equipment that their airframes have, such as the air-to-air missiles, so on and so forth. Right. This is what I was talking about in terms of a bad day at the office for the Ukrainians here. So here it says the Ukrainian army mechanized unit carried out reconnaissance by force and came under Russian army fire in the south, in southern Donetsk. In the confusion, the Ukrainian military units proceeded to roll into their own minefield, whilst also coming under heavy artillery fire, leading to the destruction of nearly every vehicle involved. Unverified, though. That isn't quite what happened. I don't know whether they went into their own minefield, but no, this is a challenging bit of footage if you're, pro-Ukrainian. So they appear to have lost a number of vehicles. There are some claiming that the Ukrainians lost 11 vehicles here, but actually, when you see the footage afterwards compared to what's kind of going on, there's a lot of confusion. It appears that they probably only lost about 4 pieces of equipment there. But this is the issue with minefields. Minefields are going to be a challenge. This is what I've said for a long time. And what you've got to remember is Ukraine might have the capability of dealing with minefields. Uh, they can technically deal with a minefield anywhere with the right equipment, but is that equipment going to be used at every single point of where they're doing attack? Is it going to be used when they're doing reconnaissance and force maneuvers? You're not going to do these light attacks and probing attacks, reconnaissance and force attacks with Mikliks and mine rollers and demining vehicles. It's just not going to happen. So minefields are going to be a huge issue for the Ukrainians. But you've got to be careful. I mean, someone says this. This guy is pro-Ukrainian, but really angry. I'm sure there was a perfect reason, this is sarcastic, for sending 1/3 of a Ukrainian battalion, it's not a battalion, into a known Russian minefield without air, artillery or infantry cover, and lose 11 armoured vehicles one by one in the probing attack versus the Zaporizhia village of Novodarivka on Sunday. So it's showing where it is and what happened. But actually, it wasn't quite like that. It was only 4 vehicles lost. It was, as this guy says, I think you're counting non-destroyed vehicles, 4. I count 4 destroyed vehicles. In fact, the video later shows the rest are moved, where the 11 vehicles in the image below, they were destroyed. How did they move out? Most look like MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush protective vehicles. So those are the sort of vehicles you want to be being hit by mines. And this guy says, look, this kind of stuff happened when they were attacking into Kherson. There was quite a bit of criticism of how they did the counter-attacking in Kherson. They did lose quite a lot of equipment there, but they did take the territory eventually. So, there are going to be people who are upset with Ukraine losing equipment. But you just got to be realistic about what's going to take place here. Okay, on the flip side, I talked about Russia losing some significantly high-value pieces of kit. Here is a montage of this is just phenomenal. So operators and main intelligence director of the MOD of Ukraine destroy Russian equipment with Polish warmate loitering munitions, 2 Panzer S1 air defense systems, R330Z8 Zhitel electronic warfare jamming communication station, Podler S-band radar, and 3 Castor 2E2 radars were destroyed. So let's just have a look at this. Again, I say this is significant. This is a significant montage here, because just in a few short clips, you can see an awful lot of high value equipment being taken out. And this is precisely what the Ukrainians will want to do before their counterattack. So this is ideal for taking out Russian air defense capabilities, but also the radars, the acquisition of targets. Russia will be less able to do that now, which gives the Ukrainian Air Force greater ability to fly unhindered, or at least less hindered, so on and so forth. So there's a bunch of equipment there in one single video that amounts to a significant loss to the Russians. Okay, When we're talking about losses, just be careful if you're going through your social media uh, sources, just be careful what is said because some of it's not always accurate. Here, the Russians are talking about Ukrainians making huge losses in Zaporizhia, and they put out stuff like this, saying, "Look at these and tanks and blah blah blah." But actually, that tank is a loss from was it July 2022? So you got the bits of corrugated iron there, the barrel poking out that side. So actually, the corrugated iron's up there, barrel's poking out that side, so the camera is placed there. Anyway, that is just it hasn't happened yesterday. That happened in July. So loads of stuff like this is taking place. Indeed, here's another example where, and this did the rounds yesterday, I think. Or was it day four? I think it was yesterday. So this was a claim that a Leopard 2A4 is burning, but actually it's a Photoshop placed on top of the actual T family tank that's burning. And so the claim is that, hey, we've taken out another Leopard. Actually, I think the problem is even more problematic because I'm fairly sure, well, someone else is saying that's a Turkish version of a Leopard 2A4. Uh, so it's even less likely to be in Ukraine, some kind of configuration. Anyway, yeah, it's not a Leopard tank, and it is people are photoshopping stuff. So it's really easy to get fooled, and I'm sure I will be fooled on a number of occasions. But we just need to be really careful and really skeptical. Okay, what has been taking place in hits and losses as well? Well, JDAMs. This is the first time I've seen a claim of JDAMs being used quite in a meaningful way over the last, well, I don't know, it's been a long time since I reported JDAM strikes. There's a lot of conversation about how these are quite easy to jam. I think I've got an article to discuss in my extra video, but I won't be doing that today because I've got a live chat. But anyway, it's a tank repair base 20 kilometers from the line. So that's good to see that they are being used. The JDAMs, to let you know, are the bombs, the dumb bombs that are able to be fitted with fins and guidance, and you drop them from your jets, and they give you greater range and a much greater accuracy, and it's a decent explosive capacity on the warhead. So they are really useful, but they're getting, as I say, they're getting jammed. And you also, to get greater range, you need to fly higher. And if you fly higher, you're more likely to be acquired as a target by by air defense systems. Okay. As far as strikes, I mean, there's strikes everywhere, right up from Belgorod. So Shebekino is still being hit. That's a big explosion in and fire in Shebekino, which is where the Russian volunteer corps have been hanging out for the last week. This is Melitopol, a report that the mayor of Melitopol reporting that Tokmak got targeted in quite a big way. Motor vehicle enterprise and a railway station. Tokmak has been absolutely hammered for the last week, and that tells you that, hey, they're going to be coming for Tokmak for sure. Luhansk, just this morning, this is all over the socials, has been hit with some significant munitions, almost certainly Storm Shadow, could be Tochka-U. An explosion occurred in occupied Luhansk. Well, actually, a bunch of explosions. There are reportedly 3 hits in the industrial area of the former Luhansk Teplovots, a train building factory, around 10 a.m. Local chats and Twitter users describe the attack as sounds of low-flying jets and then 4 explosions, so it could have been another Storm Shadow attack. There's a lot of footage about this, and some significant fires have been geolocated. Big hits to Luhansk, as you can see there. So the Ukrainians are doing quite a bit of softening up of targets right up and down the front line. I mean, this is moving back to striking Luhansk, which is in your northern area of the occupied territories, rather than all being concentrating on the south, in the southern areas like Zaporizhia. Right, there's talking about hits and losses. This is going back a week or so. Do you remember the drone attack on Moscow, where there were a bunch of drones flown at Moscow, particularly in like the richer district of Moscow, and there was talk about there being a military base near that richer district, but also some of the apartment blocks were hit, and there was talk about whether that was because the electronic warfare was jamming those systems, were jamming the drones and getting them to fly not into the military base, but off target, if you like, and hitting residential areas. Well, actually, there's if some information has come out, so drone attack in Moscow may have targeted homes of Russian intelligence officials. That's US intelligence officials saying themselves. So a senior US official and a congressional staffer with knowledge of the matter said the drone strikes appeared aimed at what were believed to be Moscow residences of Russian intelligence officers. At least one of the apartment buildings hit in the drone strikes has ties to the Russia's SVR, the Foreign Intelligence Service, according to Strider Technologies, a Utah-based strategic intelligence startup that uses open source data. According to the Strider global intelligence team, the building was owned by Russian state budgetary organization, which has held contracts with a military unit known to be a cover for the Foreign Intelligence Service. It's not clear whether any SVR officer's home was damaged or whether any Russian intelligence personnel were injured. Quote, "This is not some random attack on a wealthy suburb," said Eric Levesque, this chief operating officer and co-founder of Strider Technologies. Quote, "The strike gets to the heart of the psychological warfare elements of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which for the first time is reaching Moscow neighborhoods." It's just a dip into that article. So that gives you an idea of some of the targeting that might be taking place way behind the lines back in Moscow. Now, to go to the front lines really quickly, I'm not going to give you the whole map of Ukraine just for time reasons. But if you know where we're talking about, this is Zaporizhia, Orikhiv. The Ukrainians are pushing a lot to the south of Orikhiv. There's been a lot of activity over the last 24 hours there, and the Russians were in kind of panic mode about that. There's been a lot of activity around Velika Novosilka with Ukrainians making some gains there. As you can see, that's low ground coming down there. It appears that the Ukrainians are trying to take high ground. In fact, Prigozhin made an interesting, so he's in charge of the Wagner PMC, the mercenaries, who's been really critical of the Russian MOD. And one of the points he said the other day was that the Russian MOD are really intent on holding towns, settlements, rather than strategically or operationally significant points, such as high ground. So the Ukrainians, he was admitting that Ukrainians are doing a much better job of being militarily adept. Taking higher grounds is important for them, and the settlements themselves are less important, where the Russians seem to be really intent on holding settlements, maybe for their symbolic value or whatever. But he said that's just not militarily very sensible. And then there's activity around Bakhmut. In fact, the Ukrainians are making gains north and south of Bakhmut, and even further to the south. So this is the canal that comes down here, then joins comes into Mayorsk, where there are there's a railway junction, two railway lines coming to Mayorsk, if you remember. Well, they are making some headway around Mayorsk and just further north around Kurdimivka as well. So those counterattacks, those localized counterattacks to Bakhmut, are spreading further to the south. Whether this is, with the intent of having a much larger encirclement of Bakhmut, or whether this is just kind of prodding and poking to find weaknesses, I don't know. Right, to give you a little bit more information on some of these places. So Belgorod, Russian volunteers have pulled out of Novaya Tavlizhanka, as I said yesterday, but I think they might still be in the countryside or in wooded areas around there in the Belgorod region still. Although it's funny, you get pictures like this coming out. This is weird, right? So the Russians, hey, look at us, we've taken Novaya Tavlizhanka, right? That's like me being a drunk driver, wrapping my car around a post, killing a family of 4, and waiting for the pickup truck to start dragging my car away, cleaning up the whole area, and then taking a selfie going, yay, how cool am I? Yay, woo! What on me? These guys are like, what on us? Hey, check us out. We're cool. We've taken back a town that a bunch of Russian volunteers have held onto for the best part of 4 days in Russia. I mean, that's embarrassing. I mean, yes, that is proof, but hey, don't look too happy about it. It's been a pretty bad experience the Russians have had in Belgrade. Anyway, there's still lots of imagery coming out of there. It seems like the Russian volunteer are in. Fingers, God. Seems like the Russian volunteer unit are still in fine fettle, is what I was going to say. And it's loud in Belgorod again. So Belgorod is still getting hit, as that's the city of the oblast. So it's not where the Russian volunteer units were, but it's fairly close. And that's getting hit by different munitions. Now, as for what's going on around Bakivka, this is a reservoir just to the north of Bakhmut. This is a video from Russians. 1307th Regiment of the Russian Army report on the situation in Bakovka, that's Bakivka. They have no communication, no command, no artillery support, no food, no water. They have no evacuation, which means that the 300s become 200s. That's code. So wounded become dead because they have no evacuation. And even our Grad is shelling us. So when they do get artillery, multiple launch rocket systems, in this case, rather than tube artillery, they're hitting their own troops. So the full video you can watch elsewhere. But yeah, it's not looking good for the Russians up north of Bakhmut. Right. Russian Telegram channels are describing a hard night with events developing very dramatically. Despite the hard night, our boys do not lose their courage. Events are developing very dramatically, but our line of defense has not faltered, says Wargonzo, who's a prominent pro-Russian military blogger. In the Zaporizhia direction, Ukrainian troops carried out massive artillery preparation, which after they switched to assault operations using tanks in the Orikhiv-Tokmak direction and south of Malaya Tokmachka. So that's around Orikhiv and on the way towards Haliapole in that southern Zaporizhia direction. The battle went on all night and continues. It's too early to say that the offensive has bogged down in the direction of Orikhiv Tokmak. The enemy infantry continues to approach and try to gain a foothold. Enemy artillery and tanks are still intensively working on our positions. So there's tough fighting in that southern area for sure. And here, this Michael Weiss says, up some of Valaya's latest analysis, very optimistic, but quite a bit checks out with other sources, particularly the pounding Russians are taking with HIMARS in the south. Ukrainians have been economical in the past few months with their GMLRS, their Gimlers for exactly, so there's guided multiple launch rocket systems like HIMARS, instead of the Grads just sending, you heard that in Bakivka, the Russians are being hit by their own Grads, those are unguided, so you send off a whole volley of these rockets and they land, hopefully, using physics where you think they're going to land. Whereas a guided means you send up these rockets and they go where you tell them to go. So that's Gimlers rather than MLRS. So yeah, it's guided. Anyway, they're using HIMARS to support their offensive probing in the Zaporizhia area. Michael Weiss continues, I think Ukrainian encirclement of Bakhmut is as yet premature, but you can see the trend lines here, and if they continue ... So just to say what this person says, and again, pinch of salt, this is a Ukrainian source saying 8 or 10 brigades from the reserve have already been torn apart and smeared to nothing. This is Russian reserves, says a Russian officer on Russian losses in the first 4 days, of Ukraine's pre-offensive probing assaults. Starting June the 4th, Ukraine launched small attacks of platoon and company size across the front to identify hidden Russian artillery in other positions, then reportedly methodically smashed them with a hellfire of HIMARS and other strikes. According to the site Volya, an independent Russian language site with security contacts in Russia and Ukraine. Panicking Russian commanders, quote, demanded reinforcements and defined the situation as critical, perceiving Ukraine's probing attacks as the main offensive actions almost everywhere. But the main strike of the armed forces of Ukraine has not yet begun, and a third of the reserve of Russia's Zaporizhia group are already participating in battles and suffering losses. So some other details. Again, this is coming from a Russian source, but being reported by a Ukrainian here. A Ukrainian advance west of Vuhledar threatens to cut off 2 Russian brigades at Velika Novosilka. A second Ukrainian assault developed today near Orikhiv towards Tokmak. Russia's Dnipro group of forces is considering an imminent withdrawal from occupied Kherson to prepared defenses near Crimea and Melitopol. Ukrainian forces are advancing around Bakhmut and may soon encircle the city. Quote, it can be assumed that in the next 2 weeks or faster, the city will either be completely surrounded by the armed forces of Ukraine or liberated. Russia pulled large numbers of troops out of Luhansk to defend Belgorod from rebel incursions and potentially mount a desperate attack on northeastern Ukraine towards Kupiansk in the hope of flanking Ukrainian forces further to the south. So that's kind of a snapshot of what's going on. Now, This is completely significant, and I discussed this article that Shashank Joshi is referring to. So this is the article in December with Valery Zaluzhny, who's in charge of the Ukrainian forces. And having discussed this, I really should have. I probably highlighted this quote as well and talked about this, but I've subsequently forgotten that there's such an overt admission of what might be going on. So, rereading our interview with Zaluzhny in December, quote, this is Zaluzhny's words. I will simply state that the facts. In order to reach the borders of Crimea, we need to cover a distance of 84 kilometers to Melitopol. By the way, this is enough for us because Melitopol would give us full fire control. In other words, they might not go for the whole, get to the borders of Crimea. They might only need to get to Melitopol and secure that amount of land to hammer Crimea with Gimlers and Storm Shadows and all sorts of munitions so that Crimea becomes untenable for the Russians. Anyway, that's a snapshot of what's going on. Let's go to what's happened with the dam again. So a little bit more commentary on the Kakhovka dam being taken out and the ramifications of this. So Russian state TV is having trouble keeping the story about the Novokakhovka dam explosion straight. So the official line is that Ukraine destroyed the dam. One guest says he's read an article about how it will benefit the Russians, and he reads that from his phone, while another tries to justify the dam explosion by comparing it to the Soviets blowing up the Dnieper hydroelectric dam in 1941. So he's justifying it from a Russian point of view, blowing that up because, hey, we did it in 1941. The host then has to deal with an expert telling him that the explosive had to be planted, not bombed by the Ukrainians. In fact, that's, I think, the guy using the phone there. Not bombed by Ukrainian HIMARS like the timeline of events. The entire segment is a train wreck. And this is what happens when it's clearly not the Ukrainians. It had to have been bombs planted. This dam was meant to withstand a nuclear attack. So it's not going to be blown up by a bunch of HIMARS. Right, we've already seen that the HIMARS couldn't even take out the bridge, right? So it's not going to take out a dam. You have to explode it from the inside, and that's where the explosions were, and that was the Russian-controlled area. I mean, all the evidence supports the thesis that it was Russia what did it, right? And a lot of these propagandists and commentators recognize this, and although the host has to try and toe the party line, he's unable to because of all these different ideas floating around. There you go. And then one of them later says it was just explained it couldn't be done externally. The dam was meant to withstand a nuclear war. What external means could do it? HIMARS ain't going to do it. Literally couldn't have been done by the Ukrainians. It has to have been an internal explosion in the Russian-controlled part of the dam. There you go. Russian state media does indeed lie about everything, and in denying the consequences of blowing up the dam, they are admitting Russia did it. If they really thought Ukraine did it, they'd be overstating the consequences, not minimizing them. This is a really important point. Russia has been caught in this problematic position where they know they've done it. They're trying to sell it that it's Ukraine, but they also recognize that it's done way more damage than they probably envisioned, and as a result, they had this mix of feelings and emotions. Like if they definitely knew Ukraine had done it, then they would be shouting about this massive destruction and saying, "Look what Ukraine have done. This is terrible." But actually, you're not seeing that. You're seeing a bit of a mix of messaging that is confused because actually they know damn well that they did it, right? And so I think that tells you a lot as well. Right, 600 square kilometers of Kherson Oblast is underwater following the Kakhovka Dam breach. 600 square kilometers of Ukraine's Kherson Oblast has been flooded. According to Prokudin, 68% of the flooded land is on the Russian-occupied east bank of the Dnipro River and 32% on the Ukrainian-controlled west bank. So about 1/3 Ukrainian, 2/3 Russian, and that's because it's slightly higher on the west bank. Despite constant Russian shelling of the West Bank, evacuation efforts are ongoing, with 1,999 civilians have been rescued so far, said Prokudin. And most people were evacuated from Kherson's Korabel district, which has been among the most flooded areas. There's some insane imagery coming out. Oleshki, which is on the east bank and Russian occupied, is completely underwater. It's this ancient town. What an absolute tragedy, really. And the Russians are doing very little to help those people. Indeed, there are stories coming out that they are stopping people getting out, being rescued, for some kind of weird security issues or whatever. A tragic situation is unfolding as a dam destruction by Russians has left many residents of Oleshki and other riverside areas trapped in floodwaters. Urgent pleas for help from hundreds of people in the Telegram channel shows a dire need for immediate evacuation. So we've got the situation where the Ukrainians are saving the people on the Ukrainian side, and indeed they're even going across the river in boats, really riskily, to try and save people in the occupied side on the East Bank, because the Russians aren't doing it themselves, is the claim. Now, of course, check out verification of what I'm saying here, but it appears that the Russians are doing very little to save the people. Their emergency services aren't active in the way that the Ukrainians' services are, and that just goes to show they don't care about the claim that they are liberating Ukraine, denazifying it, and when they've got supposedly their own citizens, supposedly these are annexed regions of Ukraine that are now Russian controlled. They don't give a damn about them. Sorry, bad pun, not intended. They don't care about them. It's just, yeah, terrible. I'm close to ranting, so I'll stop. Russian forces are shooting at Ukrainian rescuers attempting to reach those trapped in flood-struck areas. Politico reports, quoting Zelensky himself. So as soon as our help, this is Zelensky speaking, as soon as our helpers try to rescue them, they are shot at, said President Zelensky. So it's an absolute hot mess. It's terrible. And the imagery coming out there I mean, if you're a big fan of animals and the environment, this is a complete tragedy, not only a human tragedy. And we're starting to hear now of some of the first casualty, death numbers. So we are starting to hear the first people who have died as a result. I mean, it would be a complete miracle if no humans perished in this, because entire towns were just swamped almost instantaneously. So anyway, there was a video of this dog being saved, and then by this guy, and then look at it afterwards. It's endearing. What an image! Just, the chap who saved that dog. Uh, it's just clinging on there. Then you see this imagery. These are, oh my goodness. So a massive fish kill occurred in Mariansk due to the rapid shoaling of the reservoir. Reports ahead of Dnipropetrovsk Regional Military Administration. There are 850 kilograms of bioresources lost. The Russians caused damage to the fishing industry in a region of more than 7.6 hryvnias. I don't know how much that is, but let's just have a look at that. It's just, again, horrific. Just from every single angle, this dam destruction has just caused untold damage. And look at how low that is in terms of water. Now, this also threatens the nuclear power plant, and I've spoken about that, is not as of yet been threatened. Again, you look at this is Holopristan. Let's have a look at that. If my internet can cope. So here, I mean, just look at that flooding. Sorry about the imagery on the right, but look at that. It's just absolutely shocking. And if you think that no one's going to die out of that, when you got old people trapped in their houses, I mean, we know animals, particularly. There's a lot of talk about kennels, dogs being like tethered and just drowning. Obviously, people's pets. Then you've got zoos. So animals, obviously, and the wild animals themselves, just will be wiped out. So there's a lot of talk about that. But then, of course, don't forget the humans too. It's just terrible, terrible. It's event. Right. If the water level, so with the nuclear power plant is in an Erhardar, which is up in a reservoir, and it uses a reservoir to cool. But actually, it has its own set mini reservoirs that it tops up by the larger reservoir. So that going down isn't a problem in and of itself, unless it gets to a certain point where it can't pump the water from the reservoir to their own mini reservoirs to cool. There's only 2 out of the 6 reactors working, I think, at the nuclear power plant. But if the water level in Kakhovka Reservoir drops below 12.7 meters, the nuclear power plant will not be able to pump water from it, says the IAEA head Rafael Grossi. Even though all 6 nuclear reactors are stopped, they're all of them are stopped now, they still need water for cooling to prevent the melting of fuel and possible release of radioactive materials. As of last night, the water level was about 14 meters. So it's only another 1.3 meters, and then you're in trouble. And this is huge. Okay, moving on to military aid and whatnot. We have Poland apparently giving 22 AW101 Merlin transport helicopters and 8 new ASW helicopters. Now, I'm not sure the detail. 8 new ASW helicopters. I think ASW means anti-submarine warfare helicopters. So that's not a type. It's not a model of helicopter. It's just a genre of helicopter. As far as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong. So I don't know what those helicopters are. I do know the Merlin. The Merlin replaced, in the UK at least, replaced the Sea King at some point. Is it a Westland Augusta collaboration? So UK-Italy collaboration to make this helicopter. So these will be super useful, of course. Not attack helicopters, but transport and whatnot. So that is great that Poland is continuing to be a super helper of Ukraine. What an ally. Ukraine and the Netherlands pressure Spain to supply Ukraine with Patriots. El País claims that Spain would be willing to transfer a battery deployed in Turkey, but Erdogan wants to keep it until December the 31st this year when current commitments expire. So that would depend on Turkey's agreement there. And this is a kind of agreements that exist between NATO countries. So there's a provision, there's a NATO network of military defense that exists across NATO countries, but it doesn't necessarily mean that in each NATO country, that country. So here, Turkey has stuff that's operated by other nations in Turkey as part of the kind of NATO agreement. Anyway, right, we're going on to geopolitical stuff now. I know you guys, some of you guys hate it when I attack Musk and Tucker Carlson, but this is really warranted today. This is proper shoddy, right? And I am not happy about this. So what happened, right? Tucker Carlson was a Fox News host. Then he was basically sacked by Fox News. The rumors are it might have been part of the $788 million lawsuit. So Fox News paid out Dominion for lying and knowingly lying about the Dominion and the voting fraud and all that. But possibly part of that deal, that $787.5 million deal, possibly Dominion asked Fox to get rid of Tucker Carlson, or it might have been because he also, during the pre-trial hearings and stuff, you had all of his social media, like WhatsApp messages or whatever it was coming out, where he slagged off a load of the Fox executives, and it could be that got Tucker hoisted out of Fox. Anyway, so then he's on his own, and Elon Musk has picked him up to have a show on Twitter. So he's just had his first show on Twitter, and Elon Musk is talking about it would be great to have shows from all parts of the political spectrum on this platform, and he's showcasing Tucker Carlson's first episode on Twitter. And lots of people saying it's become impossible to deny that Musk is working for the Russian government, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, whatever. It's not so much about Musk, but it's about what Tucker Carlson says. So he's got nothing to lose except tens of millions of dollars in pay or play clause with Fox. So the messenger says Tucker Carlson launches a new show by attacking the Jewish Ukrainian president with anti-Semitic tropes. As Tom Gurra says here, my God, this Tucker Carlson description of Zelensky. Quote, sweaty and rat-like, a comedian turned oligarch, a persecutor of Christians, a friend of BlackRock. This is what Tucker Carlson said on his first show. which is, showcased by Elon Musk on Twitter. It's a Twitter show. So Tucker Carlson, basically the whole show reads like, it appears to read like a pro-Russia show. So Tucker Carlson calls Ukraine's Jewish leader rat-like as he launches new Twitter show with pro-Kremlin rants. Just a few quotes out of this. So the former Fox News anchor opened the next act of his career with a pro-Kremlin rant, claiming that it was obvious Ukrainian forces were responsible for the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam on Tuesday. It's like, does he not do any work to like look at the data here? I mean, come on, mate. He referred to Ukrainian President Zelensky as sweaty and rat-like, a persecutor of Christians, and in bed with American investment bankers. Quote, now you see him on television. So this is Tucker Carlson speaking, and there's a lot of sarcasm going on here as well. Now you see him on television, and it's true you might form a different impression. Sweaty and rat-like, a comedian turned oligarch, a persecutor of Christians, a friend of the US investment giant BlackRock. But don't believe your eyes. Actually, Mr. Zelensky is a very good man. Of all the people in the world, our shifty, dead-eyed Ukrainian friend in the tracksuit is uniquely incapable of blowing up a dam. He's literally a living saint, a man in whom there is no sin. In other words, he's none of that, and he is the sweaty rat-like comedian turned oligarch and persecutor of Christians. And then he goes on a load of like conspiracy theory nonsense, so on and so forth. Questioning 9/11 and who's behind 9/11. I mean, honestly, Tucker Carlson, he's really stooping to new lows now. People like Gary Kasparov, who's well worth following on Twitter, by the way, saying congratulations to Tucker Carlson, whose latest despicable rant attacking Zelensky and Ukraine over the destruction of the dam actually surpassed Russia's own propaganda, even TASS hedged. But Tucker is certain his Kremlin pals are innocent. So Tucker Carlson is making more problematic claims and reaching a wider international audience about Ukraine and the Novokakhovka Dam than the propagandists themselves are. As we've seen, the propagandists are quite confused over who's responsible for all this. Tucker Carlson comes out and does their job, goes on a rant saying it's clearly Ukraine that have blown up the dam, and Zelensky is this terrible human. This infuriates me. This makes me so angry. Look at the destruction of that dam. Look at what's happened. How can you be so, like, if you're a journalist, if you purport to be a journalist, do some work, mate. Do some work, find out what's actually happened, and look at the arguments for and against Russia and Ukraine doing this. You are doing the Kremlin's bidding here. Just infuriates me. So I'm sorry if you're a massive fan of Tucker Carlson. All I can say is you probably shouldn't be anymore. I mean, the man is, I've never been a fan of his, right? But he's gone off the deep end even more now. Right. Anyway, let's end on something maybe a bit more positive. Ukraine needs to be given a clear path to NATO membership and security guarantees until it gets there already at the summit in Vilnius. I think what you're saying there, this is chairman this is Rasmussen, Chairman Alliance of Democracies and former NATO Secretary General Anders Rasmussen, saying in an interview, basically there needs to be things in place to give security assurances to Ukraine from NATO, so that when we get to the NATO summit in Vilnius, stuff's already in place, and that path is very clear, and then they can talk about how to properly map out Ukraine getting into NATO. However, you've got Hungary saying that, hey, Ukraine should never be in NATO, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be difficult, fraught with prickly issues, not least Hungary, but also places like Turkey. But then Turkey have just been turning around a little bit, as you've seen, recently with. Yes, they've got their own way with Sweden and Finland doing, changing their approach to the YPP and the Kurdish groups associated with Turkey. So Turkey said, you ain't going to join NATO until you change X and Y. And yeah, Finland and Sweden have gone and done that. But it seems like Sweden and Finland, but Finland is already in NATO. Sweden look to be following pretty shortly. So that's the Turkey aren't putting up barriers to those nations there with NATO, and I doubt they'll put up barriers to Ukraine acceding to NATO. However, I think Hungary are a different kettle of fish. Anyway, that's today's news. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate your support. Check out my live later today with Tim White and my live also next week with Georgie from Ukraine Matters. I haven't done a thumbnail for that yet. My partner's working from home today, so if my videos are a little bit late out, it's because I've been called away to do some housework or something. No, it's great to have her here, of course. Anyway, take care, and I'll speak to you soon.